In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you guys one of the most mind-blowing things that I've learned in art, and that involves the large, medium, and small principle. Some of you guys might be familiar with it already and might be even thinking to yourself, that's a basic one, how could it possibly be so mind-blowing? I'm going to be showing you that it doesn't just apply to shape size itself, but it can be applied to pretty much anything and everything in art. And by the end of this, you're going to not only have your minds blown, but you're never going to see art and make your decisions in it the same way ever again. If you're not familiar with large, medium, and small, I'd like to give you this very simple example and why and how it can even be implemented. So you can see these arrangement of 3 squares, which are all the same size. Pretty boring, right? There's no hierarchy and there's no flow in it since everything is evenly sized. By introducing large and medium and small variants of it, you'll notice that it not only creates a hierarchy, since now you can order it by largest to smallest or smallest to largest, but also the way your eyes are going to travel when looking at this is either going to go from smallest to the medium to the large, or you're going to look left and right and have your eyes travel this way. Regardless of how you look at it, it's going to be much more interesting than the previous example of similar shapes. Now let's try applying that to these more proper examples rather than just abstract shapes. And I want you guys to have a look at these and ask yourself, where do you find your attention being drawn towards in each of these designs? And I'm going to give you guys a bit of a moment. If you find that your eyes are being drawn towards the entrance and the windows for the building, and also the face area, and also the tip of the staff for the wizard, the reason why is that there's actually a greater concentration of smaller shapes around them. And I'm going to illustrate that by bringing in these colors. The color red represents larger shapes, color orange is medium, and the brighter yellow is going to represent the smaller shapes. And you'll notice it looks like a heat map of sorts, that around the focal point, you're going to notice that there's a greater concentration of these small shapes. One of the things that I want you guys to keep in mind throughout this entire video is that generally, the minority is going to be the one that is the focal point. Since the majority of these designs, as you can see by the colors, are large shapes and the minority is small shapes, the smaller shapes are going to stand out. So to illustrate that, let's have a look at this image. Just from the architecture alone, where do you find that your eyes are being drawn towards? If you find that they're being drawn towards the door, the little porch where the old man is doing some gardening, and the underside of the awning, then once again, it's because of these greater density of smaller shapes. And of course, when you're designing something, you don't just want to create shapes for the sake of it. You want to try to add in meaningful details and think about the context of the image of what you can actually add in. So you'll notice that for the smallest shapes, I tried to think about adding in maybe the door knockers, the detail, some of the nails that are holding the door together, even the strokes of the characters on the sign, and even the plants and the tools over here. These all work together to reinforce these focal points. And you'll also notice that it's not just one focal point, right? In a piece, you're going to have many pockets of sub-interest, essentially. But in the area that you want people to pay attention to the most, definitely pump up the contrast in that area even more. And of course, it doesn't just apply to environments. And because I'm not much of a character guy, I decided to pull in one of my good friends' works. And this is a character designed by Matthias Oslin. And once again, just have a look at it and ask yourself where you find your attention being drawn towards. And you're probably going to notice that it gets drawn towards the face, where you have concentration of smaller details, even such as the eyes, the strands of hair, and of course, some of the smaller elements surrounding it as well, such as these badges, even the earphones, and around the hip with the bag, and also the lettering here, the keychain, and these little stars and the belt. And you're going to have large areas of rest as indicated by this bare thigh, but also the socks as well. But you're going to get these smaller pockets of interest, such as the shoes. And of course, even with the cat itself, around the face, you're going to notice greater density of these smaller shapes And as you go further out, you're going to get medium shapes. And you're going to get these large areas of rest. And large, medium, small can also apply to how you actually construct the image itself. Take, for example, an interior like this. It might look very complex. However, the way that I built this piece that I call the Teal Wheel Tavern is that I just started off with large shapes first. And you can see that even with these large shapes, there's going to be some shapes amongst it that are still smaller in comparison to the others. But of course, in the grand context of things, these are still going to be relatively larger in comparison to some of the smaller details. And you'll see that here as I introduce the medium shapes. And even amongst these medium shapes, they're going to be a variety of sizes, such as the bar counter being much larger, and even the chimney here as well, and some of the countertops, and even some of the cabinets. But as you get to the tables, it gets a bit smaller. And this can keep on going smaller and smaller essentially. And you'll notice all these smaller details that are now piled onto the focal points and the subfocal points as well. And just to show you how deep the rabbit hole can go, I want to go even smaller and even deeper into these prop designs in particular. I did a few breakout designs of them. And as you can see now, even probably without me pointing it out yet, you can probably see almost like a magician revealing his tricks and you being so aware of it now that there's an arrangement of large, medium, and smaller shapes. And I'll bring up the heat map to show that to you once again. But hold on, it doesn't end there. You can go even further than that too. And let's take a small snippet of one of the props inside the spice rack. And did I mention that you can also apply it to line work and brush work as well? With the line work, you'll notice that some of the lengths of these strokes are longer, and some of them are shorter, and some of them basically just small dashes and dots. So even with the shapes of the strokes themselves, you can have a variety of different lengths. And similar to the examples that I showed previously, you want to try to arrange these in a meaningful way. And similar to the previous examples, I tend to put the greatest concentration of smaller shapes around the focal point. And you can see around the leaves over here that there's a lot of these smaller strokes. And as you go further out, there's going to be a lot more of these larger and longer ones. And to show that in a very simple diagram, even the way that you do these details, such as these dents on the side of the tin, can be large, medium, and small. And when you progress further into your piece, you can even think about how the brushwork can implement that same idea. You'll notice that there's larger brushwork here. There's also more medium-sized brushworks. But as you get closer to the focal point, you're going to notice that there's smaller shapes created by smaller brushwork, such as these highlights on the leaves and even on the tin as well. And even the way that I did the weathering here, such as the stain on the label, you can see that I have a large, medium, small. So it's literally everywhere. You can just apply large, medium, and small to everything. And of course, these things don't work in a vacuum. You'll notice that it's not just necessarily from the brushwork alone or the line work alone that all these things work together. And as I begin to show you a lot more of the instances that large, medium, small can be applied to, you'll notice how all of these harmoniously work together in order to create a strong statement and to communicate what you want out of the design. One thing that you guys probably haven't noticed yet is that I've actually been standing the entire time in this video. And it's thanks to today's sponsor, FlexiSpot, and their E7 standing desk. And let me tell you, it's been an absolute game changer. Okay, I'm about to go full fanboy mode now. First off, I was fully prepared for a frustrating setup process with lots of parts and challenging instructions. You know how it is. But to my surprise, it was so easy to get the E7 standing desk up and running in no time. As artists, we spend countless of hours at our desks. So having a setup that is not only comfortable, but optimal is not just a luxury, but is essential to our work. It can not only improve the quality of our work, but our longevity as well. My old desk was way too high, causing me to compensate by raising up my shoulder, leading to a lot of strain and discomfort. But now I can adjust the E7 to the optimum height for standing or sitting. And changing heights is as simple as pressing a button. You can even preset different heights for both sitting and standing mode. Need to get a quick workout in? No problem. This desk can support up to 440 pounds in weight. It can even support me standing on it with all of my PC gear on it, no sweat. Ordering your desk is a breeze as well. All you have to do is go on the FlexiSpot website, choose from a whole bunch of different models and accessories such as monitor arms and cable management systems, and watch your order visually update as you customize it. Use my exclusive code 24OG30 for an extra $30 off on an E7, E7 Pro, and E7L. For new arrival E7 Plus, use 24OG E7 Plus for an extra $50 off. Just like how we all have our own unique art styles, our bodies are just as unique. So why shouldn't our setup be built around that? Don't miss out on your chance to build your dream setup with FlexiSpot, and thanks to them for sponsoring this video. And another very common application of the large, medium, small would actually be your color scheme. As you might have already noticed that the majority of the color scheme is actually going to be the copper tin, or whatever it is that that tin is made out of, or maybe it's made out of tin. And you're going to notice that maybe the medium is going to be the foliage, or you can make the argument that it's going to be the label. But either way, I try to make sure that the areas that I want the viewers to look at has these smaller proportions of color. And in fact, let's just say for a moment that the white is the accent color, is the color that takes up the least proportion in terms of the whole color scheme. I purposefully put it around the label in order for that to be the focal point or the area that stands out the most. And you can also see it being applied to these other props that I designed for the Teal Wheel Tavern as well. You'll notice that the accent color, where I want the focal point to be, to have the colors that are of the smallest proportion, such as the flames for this candle, and the lemon that is surrounding the fish, that's framing the fish. And even here as well, the smallest proportion you can see is essentially the cooler and even more saturated and just generally more unnatural colors that is created by the paint versus the majority of the color scheme that is made from more natural materials such as the wood, the foliage, the stone, and even the metal here as well. And one thing to keep in mind when it comes to doing these color schemes, you can always do it before you create your design and go into the color explorations. But don't worry too much about exact accuracy, and neither do I really want you to worry about having all the colors encapsulated. You might notice that there's some slight color variants that are not represented here in this bar, but that's okay. As long as the general squint read and plot out the general and main colors, then everything can just be slight variants that you basically add on as you further refine the design. But one thing to keep in mind is that colors are not necessarily tied to the material, and these are some examples to illustrate that. In this weapon over here, you'll notice that there's going to be metal of two different colors. There's one that's more of the neutral gray, but then you also have the one that is a little bit more yellowish in color. And once again, this might not be a very accurate representation of the material distribution, but you'll notice that the majority of it is made out of metal or maybe the crystal, and the minority is the wood. And this is also another example where you can't just rely on one aspect in order to pull all of the weight of drawing the attention of the viewer. Because despite the wood being a minority, the handle is not the focal point. It's also because of many different things here, such as shape contrast and even value contrast, that further reinforces that as a focal point as opposed to the wood. And you'll notice here too, there's woods of different colors, and generally, even with these materials taking up a much smaller proportion in comparison to some of the other parts, it doesn't necessarily mean that the foliage or the area that the foliage is in is going to be automatically what draws the most interest. But it's definitely one aspect you can try to add on in order to reinforce the statement that you want to create. And as I briefly mentioned earlier, shape type is another aspect of the image that you can apply large, medium, small to. You'll notice for both of these designs that the majority of the shape types are actually comprised of squares or rectangular shapes, and the roofs are made out of triangular prisms. But at this point, you guys probably are going to notice it before I even say it, but the areas that are going to stand out here are the ones that have the minority, which is these circular shapes over here. And of course, I try to reinforce it in different ways for these images that it actually does stand out a bit more, such as the different material colors and having a lot of the smallest details here as well. And here, having this as the tallest part of the image in order to reinforce it too. And of course, even when you're designing something, you want to make sure that it's not too obvious that, oh, the focal point is the only part of the image that has it. Sometimes you can if you really want to make a bold statement, but I try to create a little bit of a fall off. So you'll notice that the further away from the main focal point, you'll notice that there's instances where I implement a bit of circular design language as well, such as the arch, these barrels over here, and even the doorways and the windows and even the chimneys as well. And you can say even the smoke. So sometimes having a little bit of this shape fall off can make things feel a little bit more natural. Once again, rather than having something too obvious that you're trying to make it shout like, look at me, and nowhere else in the image having it. Like I said, there's moments for that, but if you want to have something that feels more integrated and natural, then consider this. Before I get into how to apply large, medium, small to lighting, I want to tell you guys a little bit of a backstory to this one, to this illustration in particular. This was a rough sketch that I showed to a friend of mine, Rudy Siswanto. And some of you guys might recognize him from the amazing splash art that he creates for Riot. And I worked on this piece as a contest entry for Art War 3, which is a contest that is hosted by CubeBrush many years ago, many moons ago. And the goal of it is to design a hero character or a villain character and to put them in a final illustration showing off their power. So I designed this character called Fugumaru that is inspired by Pufferfish, a sumo wrestler, and a fisherman. And you can see him fighting off some pirates here with his puffer panache and puffer power, which involves him shooting out needles from his body, hitting its unfortunate victims. And wherever the victims get shot at, they're going to basically inflate rapidly. And before you know it, it's going to inflate large enough to the point that they're going to start floating and flying away, as you can see with some of these pirates over here and some of the limbs starting to inflate where it gets shot. But anyways, it's not about this character. I wanted to talk about the sketch that I showed Rudy. And he told me that, well, one of the things that's making this image feel really noisy is the fact that the light shapes, or even the shadow shapes as well, all feel very sameish. If you guys can't see it yet, let me show you what I mean. It's essentially all of these little shapes that are created by the lighting, you'll notice as I start to outline them, are very similar in terms of the size. And remember the very first example that I showed you guys at the start of the video? What happens if you have shapes of very similar size throughout? Well, it begins to flatten out the image. And it's not used in a very strategic way in order to reinforce the focal point. You can even say that the flames here as well are pretty much somewhat similar in size too. So Rudy gave me some pointers and I believe a paint over as well. And I'm going to show you guys the finished result of that piece. And as you can see, not only did I push the lighting, but I also improved the shape, size variety in it, where you have some pirates much closer and the ones further away are much smaller. So now we have that really nice large, medium, and then small arrangement happening. But even with the lighting as well, you're going to notice that you have now a large shape here. And then you have medium size shapes here. And of course, you're going to have subfocal points. So there's going to be some parts that have smaller lighting shapes as well. But around the focal point, you'll notice I blasted with a lot of small shapes in the form of highlights and all of that, which you can see on the needles, the pores on the face, and even these little bits on the rope and even the rain as well. So essentially it's creating, once again, this flow and kind of like funneling effect, making the focal point where it has the greatest density of smallest shapes stand out the most. And of course, there's many other aspects of the image that add to that, but at least from a lighting and even shape size perspective and implementing what I've shared with you guys so far, you can probably see why this image works so much better than the original rough sketch. And to illustrate that in a much more simple example, let's just imagine that you're creating a piece where you're creating a komorebi effect, or this dappled lighting that filters through foliage. If you have all of the light pools the same size, it's gonna once again flatten and dilute the image. However, if you create a large, medium, and small arrangement, you can notice that it creates this kind of flow in the piece as opposed to this. So to see if you guys are starting to get it, I'm gonna show you guys one of the other illustrations that I've done many years back. You'll notice me pulling in a lot of my old illustrations here for examples. But for this piece, I want you guys to try and pay attention. Where did I put my large shapes, my medium shapes, and where did I put in my greatest density of smallest shapes? And by putting on this overlay, you guys are probably gonna see it much more clearly. You'll notice that in this area, you have a bunch of large shapes. And as you get here, the shapes get smaller, more medium sized. You have a bunch of small shapes here, but a lot of small shapes are also present on the granny right here. And here, you can kind of group it as a whole, like a bunch of large and medium shapes here, maybe a couple of smaller shapes here as well. Because once again, we don't want to make it too obvious where it's only the focal point that has the small shapes, but a natural fall off. But you're going to notice that all in all, what it's kind of creating is this flow from the large gradually diminishing towards the smaller shapes, maybe even something like this. And in this other illustration as well, called the Ruins Dragon, you guys probably can see this one a little bit more clearly, but you're gonna see that there's a large pool of light here with some medium shapes on the dog, some on the character, but as you get towards the face, you get small shapes. That's medium. And here you're gonna get a larger shape, more medium-sized shapes here, and small shapes, and a bunch of small shapes here as well. So you can see that I strategically put them in the areas that I want you guys to focus at, which is mostly the archaeologist and also the Ruins Dragon. Well, so far, these are all of the different characteristics and aspects that we can apply large, medium, small to. So just as a quick recap, we have shape size, shape type, colors, lighting, materials, brushwork, and line work. It's in no particular order of importance, but once again, you want to make sure to layer all of this and make sure that all the decisions that you make with each one ultimately reinforce the focal point and statement of the piece and the design that you want to create. With all these things in mind, it might seem overwhelming. And one of the things that you might find is that it's actually quite challenging to try and keep all of these things in mind when you're looking at an artwork or even when you're trying to implement it into your own piece. So what I recommend is trying to look at all these aspects separately. So maybe looking at one artwork and looking at it through the lens of shape type or even shape size or colors alone, and trying to individually then implement that into your own work. Once you become a bit more comfortable trying to then juggle all of those things at once in your own work or seeing that in other people's artworks as well. So what I ultimately hope is that this gives you guys the tools to not only analyze your work and self-critique your work so you know what you can improve on, but also as a way to study other artists' works but appreciate them much more as well. Maybe now you can put words to concepts and abstractions that you didn't really understand or could really explain before. And as a little finisher to all of this, let's take a little trip down memory lane and have a look at some of my old works from 2013. And even from this alone, you guys can probably see now why they're not so successful. You can probably see as one main thing that all of the brush size, that all of the brush strokes, and one of the main things that you guys probably can see is that all of the brush strokes are essentially the same size and of the same density. And even when it comes to the color scheme, the proportion of this bluish sky and also the flames from the trees and the windows, they're all kind of evenly proportioned to the point that it flattens the image out. And even the trees here as well. I tried to portray a sense of depth, of course, with the larger trees here, but a lot of this area kind of flattens itself out. And same deal here as well, that all these mountain peaks all kind of have the same size despite the fact that it's going further back into the background. And even the crystals too, and the brush strokes, and even the color ratio as well. And compare that to a much more recent piece that I've done, and that I've done a video as well, of course, where you can probably see me using a lot of these principles of large, medium, small in different aspects of it. And maybe as a bit of an exercise, you can analyze it too. And in fact, if you actually want the cheat sheet and to see how I created this piece from scratch, you can watch this video where I narrated the whole time lapse and the process of creation and still talk about some of these principles as well. For example, the majority of this piece is nature, whereas the minority of this piece is this character with much more vibrant colors. And even with the sheep as well, you have a large, I guess, or you can count this as large, I suppose. But either way, they're of varying sizes: large, medium, small. And even with the flowers as well, large. And as you go further back, it's small. The trees, you have the large, medium, and small. And even with the proportions of the color schemes of the character, you're going to notice that the majority of it is the red color, and the minority being the blue and the fur or the white color. So you have the large, medium, small as well. Oh, and I guess you can consider this part of the image to further reinforce that too. And even with the rocks as well, large, medium, small. So you guys probably can see what I mean when I say that knowing that large, medium, and small can be implemented to everything can be so mind-blowing, because you'll realize that a lot of the decisions, especially of the artists that you admire, they implement this, and maybe to a subconscious level at this point. And even for this piece too, you can probably clearly see some of the large, medium, small. Like with the boat, large, medium, small. And even with the cats as well, you have large, medium, small. And even with the architecture too, the majority is going to be the straw. And then you have the plaster. This is the medium, and the small is the red tarp. And even for the color scheme of the boat itself, majority is wood, and then medium, I guess you can consider it to be the straw as well. And the small, you're going to see the color accents from the fish, and of course from the cat itself as well. So now you have a large, medium, small, this color distribution found in the characters. And even with the clouds as well, you have your large, then your medium, and your smalls as well. And even with the waves, you have large, medium, small. And I hope that this video has blown your guys' mind in the same way that it did when I first learned about the power of large, medium, and small, and how it can be implemented to basically everything and anything. And if you guys found this video to be helpful, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't for more videos like this, as I try to share you guys more tips and tricks of things that I wish that I learned when I was younger and starting off in my career. And of course, share it with someone else that you think could use a little bit of mind explosion as well. Until the next video, guys, take care, and as always, stay stretchy.